All right, everyone. Welcome back to the latest episode of The Shortcut. You'll notice probably two things different for this episode. One, I'm over in the West Coast in San Fran, where the Kapwing team is located. I think more important is that I'm joined by our first guest on the show, John Collins. John, if you don't know, he's a content and communications consultant for high growth companies. But before that, he was a content leader at both Intercom and Ramp. And I will say, I'm sure John, as any great content leader, would love to just get into the substance of the talk, but I do have to flatter a bit here, is not a lot of teams, I think, in our space, even in marketing, where a lot of the work is like public and sort of visible to anyone. Not a lot of teams sort of get known as like the single team or a single time when they were really doing great work. And it's surprising, at least to me, like how many people actually reference sort of like Intercom's run in the 2010s as like a sort of real pillar in the content marketing world. So, John, I'm sure you've heard that before, but I'll say it again. And thanks for being on the show.
Delighted to be here, Greg. And I'm always happy to hear that, despite being Irish, and I think Irish people even more than content marketers generally kind of bloodshot at getting recognition. But yeah, no, listen, it's great. We're like, it's a lot of hard work, but like,
definitely. And I have not yet spoken to you on sort of like a podcast format. I've always wanted to. I think now though, like it's a pretty interesting time to chat. I would say something we'll get into here is you recently published a report alongside Nigel and the team at Organic Growth Marketing, sort of all about like how buyers view search results and how they evaluate purchases before they make them. And I think like any sort of evidence right now is interesting, because I think a lot of even longtime practitioners are viewing the world in content marketing as kind of being shaken up, or at least old playbooks are looking, maybe less and less stable in the future. So anytime you bring evidence to the table is interesting, but I think right now, especially, people are sort of yearning for additional evidence or just talking points that go beyond like theory and hearsay and kind of like wild predictions. So I think firstly, I'd love to just ask, like, what brought about the report? Like what was kind of driving you to uncover this data yourself? Like how did it kind of come together?
So I suppose it was the big thing for both myself, particularly for myself, but I think for Nigel as well at OGM is, there is a lot of change, and I think there is a tendency, and we've seen it a lot. Despite that change, particularly in content, I think there's a lot of tendency just to rely on a tried and tested playbook, a playbook that worked very well in the past, but like increasingly is not working. And, we obviously, as consultants, see a lot of folks' business, and, we're definitely advising them to try and do something that stands out in the ordinary, to really focus on like quality content. And I think it was really like, let's try and get some data points to back this up. And so, to like, let's not just rely on, our own sort of past experience and kind of go, well, this is what we know, what works. Let's actually try and go out there and talk to the market and see what's going on. Which is why we partnered with it. We didn't do the research ourselves. We partnered with a market research company, Ignite Fusion. So they actually went there, got the results and designed the survey and all that. But really it was, we kind of informed it with like, listen, this is what we want to interrogate. This is what we want to find out.
Yeah, definitely. And so we have a couple of different things I'd love to kind of dig into. There's as kind of shown on screen here, there's a full report. Like I definitely encourage everybody to check out, and we'll list in the show notes. But some of the pullouts or some of the standouts for me, especially, I think I'm going to like hazard a guess here that maybe one of the more surprising data points, at least for people who are a bit more doom and gloom nowadays about the state of search, was actually this one around buyer satisfaction with B2B search results overall. So yeah, as you can see here, like a minimum, or like, I guess 80% of people were at least satisfied with the search results. I think the first question I got to ask is John, were you surprised by this? Were you expecting something different, or did this actually validate maybe a contrarian kind of point of view that you've held recently?
No, I think both myself and Nigel were really, really surprised by this one. I mean, listen, your job, I suppose, as particularly when you're a consultant, more than even when you're in house, is to kind of like really be on top of trends and like what's coming down the line, and sort of like help your clients be ready for that. And so, you can kind of be in that echo chamber, and it's like, oh, search is dead, AI is taking over, there's like it's too easy for people to game the system when it comes to SEO. We've seen a lot of like good programmatic SEO, but we've also seen a lot of like slightly more suspect programmatic SEO. I think the other, so like you've seen all these things, and so we assumed, we're kind of thinking about that all the time. So like surely buyers are hearing the same things and are sort of like much more circumspect about search. But no, I mean, what I would say is I think the further result, like at the headline, you might be like 80% people are satisfied with the results they get from Google. And you might think, okay, game over. I just need to invest in my SEO and I'll forget about it. But I think as you dig into it, it's more nuanced, and like, yes, they're satisfied, but they also need to do a bit of work with that. They're not just searching for like company published content. They're looking for different types of content now. Like the amount of people like who put in, a software vendor, but then put in like reviews or Reddit or whatever it might be behind that search term, because they're trying to get to that. Like, so they're not that third party validation. So they're not always necessarily just like Googling, show me the top 5 CRM vendors.
Yeah. And in a way, I suppose those like search, the queries that they're adding, those like addendums are sort of a signal of like, I don't actually trust or I don't want at least the default results that I know Google is going to give me, which is probably like the searcher probably doesn't have this like really in the weeds context, but a lot of us know it's like it's going to be authority sites that probably have been around forever. The content might be of questionable quality, so people seem like they try to circumvent that a little bit sometimes, at least with like Reddit reviews or like adding other kind of addendums to the queries too, it seems like.
100%. I think it's quite clear that like the trust thing is a big thing, but people are still, so we found out like people they trusted third parties way more than they trusted the companies. But when we look at the different stages of the buying cycle, they still refer to company content, because I think they kind of know what it is. As you can see on screen here, like company content is the least trusted source,
right?
But they're then actually using those third parties to kind of to validate, which I think is quite interesting. And it's quite interesting in terms of what it means in terms of your content strategy and your SEO strategy.
Yeah, I mean, this is great to bring up because, like you said, I think the first data point almost it feels maybe more comforting than it actually should be. I would say like all things considered, do you have kind of a set of things that you feel like content marketers should maybe like not be complacent about? Like, so search results, people are generally satisfied. However, there's all these other sort of like workarounds they're doing. They're trusting third-party sites. They're not trusting company content as much. Is there things that content marketers should just like not be complacent about after having seen this data?
I would say the big thing that came across to me was like, there's potentially like and this is something I've been saying to clients for a while. There's like too much content out there, and there's like too long content, and you want to, I think you need to focus on less content and like figuring out how you can really like do quality and add value. I think that's the big thing. So whether it's like people looking now for like the short explainer videos, like really big thing when people are researching like at the early stage, like they're considering multiple different products. Like how many of us have actually gone out to a website and this looks really, the landing page is beautiful. It's got all this beautiful description of like, it's a multimodal solution for X, Y, and Z. And you're still kind of going, what do they do?
Yeah.
Translate. And I think if like, people want those like 1 minute explainer video. Oh, this is where they fit in. Like something else that came through as well is like this opportunity for what traditionally I would have like thought of as further down the funnel content, but just like people are like, how does it integrate with other products? Like I want to like objective comparisons, like I think the playbook, and Nigel kind of said this very clearly on the site where we're analyzing the results. The old playbook where it's like, oh, here's the top 5 CRMs in the market, and I'm going to make me number one. And like, I think the buyers are way more sophisticated than that. They want something they want something objective from you and kind of go, hey, we're the CRM for agencies, or, we're the CRM for freelancers, or whatever it is, or like, if you've got like international business, we're the people who can really help you do that. But if you just try and sort of say, hey, we're the best CRM for everything and publishing your own content, that stuff just doesn't have credibility anymore. And I think it's really talking to a messenger and like being more objective, being higher quality. And I think in most cases, it's not about a high volume content strategy anymore. Like we did that back in the day at Intercom. We published 5 times a week at one point. But we've seen the returns by increasing our publishing schedule. I think that's really hard to see like right now. Because I think there's just so much content out there, and there's so much, like, let's face it, low quality content. AI definitely is driving some of that. We can get into that as well if you like.
Yeah, definitely. I was actually like, after reading the report, I feel like I at least connected some of my own dots here of, I do wonder if the stage is set. It feels like this talk kind of comes around like once every couple of years, or it's at least something that most content marketers in their heart of hearts wish sort of would come back or wish would be true. But I do wonder if the stage is kind of set for this like super surface level, sort of like keyword first, keyword engorged content to really start to be harder to argue for. For me personally, I see it as like this combination of trends of like increasing competitiveness in SEO. At my previous role, like we were at Shopify, a company in a domain that was like situated to take advantage of that. But if you were to get into the space today, I mean, the sites that you're going up against are just like a totally different league. So that's one. The second, that comes from your report directly, is like more and more buyers are viewing company content as super samey. I can't tell the difference between pages or between the content or what they're saying. And then kind of finally is this like on the horizon AI generation situation of AI generated answers. At least from your report, they seem to be kind of polarizing, but at the very least, it seems like buyers are already trusting some AI generated responses more than like the company produced content. So yeah, you put all that together and it's like, oh man, the what is in the H2 style keyword content seems like less and less, like there's less and less of a case to make for that, unless you're maybe one of the most sort of like well-capitalized like market leaders. But if you're a startup, in your opinion, are we getting to a point where it's like that playbook's almost ready to be thrown out by most companies and we need to get back into like highly opinionated sort of like idea first content? Can we wish? Can we hope?
Yeah, and it's interesting you say, because like I've been in content marketing now for nearly a decade, and like everything goes around. Like we see sort of like things that were not just because they were popular, they were effective. 7-8 years ago, we're actually coming back and are effective again. The first thing I'd say is it's interesting because actually if you look at and Nigel obviously would be more the expert on this because he focuses more on the hardcore SEO side, or more on the content side. But my knowledge of it, like you can see what Google's trying to do, and with helpful content updates and things like that, where it's penalizing that playbook, and it is trying to figure out the sites that are actually adding value, and if you are sort of basing your SEO content strategy on your competitors, who are running that playbook, it's going to be really, really hard to rise to the top. And I think particularly for startups, you just want to try and stand out from the crowd. So I think, and get attention. And like the benefit of that as well is it's not just a pure SEO content play. It builds your brand as well, So I think it's a strategy that is more likely to succeed, but will actually, deliver more value for you. It's not just purely like we're generating traffic, and it's more likely to generate like qualified traffic, people who are genuinely in the market for your solution. So that's the other thing I would say. On the AI side of things, I think it is interesting that, the buyers themselves were using AI, they were using ChatGPT to get information, or to, it's hard to know. Like we would obviously in the space of a 25 question survey, already dig into each area, but certainly something I'd be curious to follow up on is like how people are using ChatGPT in that scenario. But they agree that they use it themselves, and they trust it. But interestingly, there was some skepticism about like the brands themselves using AI. like that,
Right.
that they thought the trust in branded content wouldn't be as much if they thought it was produced by AI. And so I think like it's clear you've got to have an AI strategy. And I think there's two things to think about. It's like, how are we using AI to help us create content? And then I think it's like, how are we creating content that will help us be successful, or will get sucked into those large language models and help us be found? Because I think increasingly the future of SEO and content is it may not even result in a visit to your site. You know, It could just be like that content showing up in a chatbot, attached to a large language model. It's increasingly it's a snippet on search results, and that may be all you need. You may not need it. But I think you got to think about those two sides. And I think on the content production side, which is kind of more what you were asking me about, I think that the thing to bear in mind is like look at specialist tools. I think there are tools that are specifically designed, like Jasper for marketing teams, or tools like Writer, which are more just a little bit more general than that. But like again, they're more about the production rather than something very, very general like ChatGPT, which will produce your content for you. But I feel like it's a very broad brush tool. So remember that like AI will, get you over that blind page problem. Will create something that you can then hand to a human editor or marketer and just say, look, like you've done the basic research, but now you got to like add that human flair and that opinion, as you mentioned, that's going to help you stand out from the crowd.
Yeah, and I do sometimes wonder, or maybe it's like a kind of a pet theory that like, yes, we have like seen some case studies come out where I would say like not a good controlled disciplined use of AI content results in like a slide in traffic or something not so great happening. But I often do feel that like the companies and the teams that are making it work, they maybe just don't have so much to say at the moment. Like for one, like they're not facing any issues, so there's nothing to really like uncover in like an Ahrefs report or something like that. And number two, it's like if you can find a way to really incorporate it into your team, it is kind of an edge right now, especially if the way that you're using it doesn't compromise the quality, doesn't compromise the like the facts and the sort of authenticity of it. So I think we'll hopefully start to see more teams be a little more transparent about their usage of AI. But I think right now it's like if it's working, it's being kind of kept under wraps, or just not being talked about so much.
Yeah. Totally. And so I think like, our survey showed that like there is a sizable, about a third of respondents were like, raised that said there would be trust issues if they thought brands were using it. And so I think that, I think a lot of people just got that instinctively that like, hey, we don't necessarily want to shout this from the rooftops that we're using AI to create content. But like it's definitely the emerging space. It's still a bit of the Wild West. And so, I think maybe in the future we'll have things like, a quality mark of like, almost like a watermark or something to say something was produced with AI, or that like, hey, this isn't AI produced. It's going to be interesting how it develops over the next couple of years.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm curious about like all things considered here, and this is a big question, so maybe this is something we can kind of unpack and sit with for a bit. But like, I do feel like the past few years, and honestly months, like we need to talk in months, especially recently, have like they've been such a shift in terms of how I've given like what the kind of advice I've given to companies who are like just spinning up their content strategy, the kind of stuff that we're thinking about. So I got my start back in kind of the early 2010s. I know you've been in the space for a long time too. Do a few things like jump to mind in terms of the big changes, in terms of like what you advise people to do, especially when they're like starting their content strategy? I could give like a single example is like, I think back in 2010, almost everyone would start with a blog. And nowadays it's like, that's a serious question and not really an easy or simple one. It certainly doesn't default to the blog anymore, I think, in most cases. So I'd love to get your take on like, what are the major things that have changed in terms of the advice you're giving nowadays?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think you need some kind of space where you can kind of publish updates as, like sort of news about the company. Well, like actually having a full-blown blog strategy, I'm like, not sure that's necessarily going to work. Seeing a lot more like pushing clients towards data-driven stuff, particularly if you have like a very like a product that lends itself to that. So like certainly I'd say Ramp, one of the first things I did, we launched like a spending benchmark where it was just looking at like Ramp is a a spend management platform, but they had you get a company credit cards as part of it. So it was like, what are our let's look in aggregate at like what our customers are actually spending money on. That's really interesting. And for instance, when we did it, it was at the stage where people were starting to move back to the office after the pandemic. So it was like all back to the office spend report. But like that kind of stuff where it's like you can bring opinions to the table, but I think actually even stronger than opinions can be data, and obviously you can then have opinions about like what you're seeing in the data. But I think that's somewhere you can really, really add value early on. The other thing is video. I think like what is your video strategy from the get go? But I think like the big thing, which hasn't changed really for me, is like really just try and understand like your buyers and where are they right now, and like what's the language they're using, and how do they think about the problem that you're solving, and then create your content from there. So like back in 2014 when I started Intercom, the way I got that insight and then which informed the content strategy was actually trade shows. Like actually, the content team would be I certainly would be, and I would encourage others on the marketing team to do it, to be just get out there and meet customers at conferences and events. And like it's even easier nowadays with like things like Gong or Sales Ops or whatever. There's all these different tools. So you actually sit in on sales calls or watch recordings of sales calls and really get a sense of like who the customer is. As I said, even the language they use, the words they use to describe, but like even small things like how do they dress? What do they look like? They can all like help you just think about the content strategy and like where are these people likely to be hanging out, and like how can you talk authentically to them? Really just try and, as I say, it's a bit cliche, but like fall in love with that customer and really like think about like. And so it's easy to say like there's a lot more interest in video, but like what's your customer look like? And are they consuming video? Like what are they? Where do they get their knowledge, or where do they hang out these days to learn about their job?
Yeah, and I mean this genuinely, that like focusing on the things that don't change, always important, but probably like especially important when a lot of the like peripheral surface level things are changing. There's so much temptation to like you said, like we got to do this format, we have to use this tool, we have to try AI, and I think there's more reasons than ever to sort of like skip the basics, especially like understanding the customer. So
yeah, I think just marketing in general, it's got so broad, and it's like everyone's asking you to do everything. And like I'm kind of conscious with this report, we're even going to say to people, hey, you got to think much more about like content for third parties, and how are you like thinking about review sites and influence. Which traditionally was not part of the content marketer's job, but I think kind of has to be now. Like I think you got to, like I've always said, you got to think about distribution and promotion as much as like content production. Like ideally it's 50-50, but I know in reality it rarely if ever is on most content teams. But yeah, like I would say to avoid that like sort of getting spread too thin is, what I always do is like, is there 2 or 3 like things that we feel strongly about, like that whole idea of strong opinions loosely held, that we can like get an experiment out there and actually get some data points and actually see, okay, this is going to work for the company. Like we've all done it. I've been places about, hey, I think the podcast will work great here. You actually get a season out and you kind of go, yeah, it was okay, but like, actually maybe there's other areas that we need to invest in, other channels that are going to reach the audience, and you just have to say, okay, that was a learning, let's move on.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like the well-scoped experiment, right, limits the kind of like downside, limits the overinvestment. It just gets you away from the armchair opinions, which like everybody in the company is going to have about marketing. So that won't change, I don't think. So
yeah, like at Intercom, we like literally, it was, I think it was 2015, we launched our podcast, and it was like,
yeah,
will people listen to a podcast from a brand? Which seems crazy now because like every startup seems to have a podcast, but like we literally, I think I got a budget like, hey, like that might be $5,000 or something, like do 10 episodes, like just figure it out and see it. And of course, after that 10 episodes, we had enough data to go, actually, we need to invest in this. Like we built studios in our offices and all sorts of things because it was such a big channel for us. But I don't think you would have gone. I just think that like sort of ring-fence, quick, small experiment. Let's get something out. Because we could have spent like 6 months, developing a podcast strategy. We could have spent $100,000 with some agency, like coming out with like a plan before launching. But actually, just getting something rough and ready out there and actually getting the data and then kind of go, okay, like we know this is going to work. Let's make the investments now.
Yeah. And I don't know if this, in particular was your approach to this, but it seems like it makes sense at least to like focus on making the production good and the content great, at least when you get started. Like as long as the production is, it's not sort of like grading, focus on the content first and then production kind of can improve over time. So I'm on continuity camera in case, hopefully no one's impressed with this video quality because there's no crazy setup here either.
Yeah, absolutely. I think content first, and then as I say, you can, within reason, like I've seen big brands and literally they did it looks like they were following that strategy. They didn't experiment, but it literally sounds like something that was recorded on an iPhone and you just oh my God, like no wonder this thing didn't take, like there is a bar, not just on the podcast. I think it's like, there's a bar that you have to reach at this stage because it's so competitive, but like you, at the same time, you don't need to do something that's going to win a Pulitzer Prize or an Oscar, just when you're doing your experiment.
Yeah, definitely. And I will say, I think a good, like, a kind of follow on to this is like, we have seen more and more, and I think I have even in some cases suggested to folks more and more to look at like video podcasts as potentially like the anchor medium or the anchor, sort of content format that they start with. I would say for the reason why, at least I make that recommendation, and the reason, for instance, like why we're doing the show right now is like, in B2B, the opinions are some of the hardest things to get. So number one, podcasts open up this like conversational style where you can just talk to someone who really knows what they're talking about something they may have done recently. And then instantly you have like really great, strong source material. But more and more, it's been sort of like the distribution aspect too. Like it's gotten pretty simple to just add video to the podcast. And then the clips come from that are great fodder for like all the channels that you want to use across social. But I feel like there's a bit of dissonance of like, that's how some people feel. And then others are sort of like, we're like peak podcast now instead of just peak content. So I'm curious, like the data from your report showed that podcasts, not really sort of a huge influence in terms of like a purchase decision, but huge potentially for like brand and just that first touch awareness. Where do you kind of stand on like podcasts nowadays? Like how are you talking to clients about this?
Yeah, so I think I agree, Ron, with Greg, in terms of like, there's a built-in distribution there. You can really get podcasts out. I think the problem is, you could have been the first, and it's not like that many years ago, you could have been the first sort of like really authentic podcast for accountants or the first really authentic podcast for, whatever the vertical you're selling into that. I think the problem is now is there's probably like 10 competitors in the space.
Yeah.
So like, how do you stand out? Yeah, I definitely think video is like, has to be part, like a video podcast, a video version of your podcast really needs to be there because like there's just so many consumers who will only consume video. And so if you can get that flip strategy right, even for the longer form stuff, like YouTube it's amazing how many people still use YouTube for business, and like research business topics there. So I think, I think there's still a lot of life in podcasts, but it's gotten way more competitive, and it's got to be like, how are you going to stand out from the crowd? Like I think, even just a format, like I think like interesting conversations were like the kind of the obvious thing a couple of years ago. I actually think like if you can afford to invest in a more magazine style format where you interviewing multiple people and stitching it together, that can work really well. But that's more expensive. So like anything, as it's successful for people, more and more people rush into it, and then it gets more expensive to your ROI lessens. But it's something there is a strong ROI in podcasts, but it's getting hard. It's getting harder.
Definitely. Yeah. I like, we sort of approach ours as like, we wanted to build the muscle first. So like a lot of our first recordings were conversations just with our in-house team. Bringing in guests is kind of like the next layer. And then, like you said, like actually exploring different, I would say like sub shows or concepts, or we're going to do this show in this way. It's going to be more of a teardown style or a roundtable style. So that might be one approach for folks who feel like they're maybe lost at sea with like, I don't have the killer concept today, is like, you can kind of build your way there, I think too. So yeah, that's super interesting. I think the other thing that maybe surprised me, or maybe one of the data points that most surprised me outside of the bit about search, was the role of like short form video. across both like information gathering and sort of like trialing. So yeah, as kind of can be seen here, like this, I think we have seen before, like short video clips, short form video. It's kind of amazing how much people prefer it. But I think something really interesting that this report sort of added was a bit of a distinction where it's like short form video is mostly or like greatly preferred when people are trying to just gather information. I think, like you said, in some cases, it's literally, can someone interpret what this product actually does, so that I don't have to sift through all of this like web copy. But it was interesting to note that like long form video actually came in a second, I believe, after like free trials, in terms of people actually like trialing and experimenting with the software. I'd be curious though, like for short form video specifically, if you were talking to kind of like a content lead who they're looking at Q1 of next year, and they're trying to sort of come up with like, what's our short form, video approach going to be? Like, what are you kind of advising them? Anything you're cautioning them about before they jump in?
Yeah. So I mean, and just to clarify, like when we say short form in the survey, it's like under 1 minute.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it is. To me, like how I interpreted this was, it kind of goes back to what we heard in other parts of the survey, which is what people just kind of want to get away from the fluff, and they want to like just get a clear understanding of like what your product does or what your offering is or where you add value. And so I think it's that very direct, no frills video. I saw a really good example recently from Equals, who were like some former colleagues at Intercom set up Equals, which is a new kind of spreadsheet. They just launched dashboards. Just saw it like really, really clear. Like the video was just like, oh, okay. Like I'm not a finance guy, but suddenly actually with this, I went from like, yeah, like I really like their product. Actually, I'm a like small angel investor in the product, but I suddenly went from like, oh, this is a cool product that they're building finance teams, to like, holy crap, with this dashboards thing, that I could see how like this could be used across multiple teams, right? And then they actually had like a video for the launch that really just like, oh, there's no way, even if they had written like a pretty succinct blog post to try and say the same thing, there's probably no way I would have read it, right?
Yeah.
It's just. So I think it's like trying to figure out, and again, if this is, listen, I think there's, if you're talking about things like podcasts, you can definitely kind of like think about like, okay, what's our kind of volume video strategy? Like, you might turn this podcast into like 5 different clips that you share on different channels or whatever. But I think you've got to think about like, what's your hero video content as well? Like, for around a product launch or, whatever it might be, big events, stuff that you're not doing volume wise. I think try and nail that first. Because I think some of the stuff like where you're almost repurposing content, that's pretty easy to do. This is that's just a case of reslicing and dicing. But I think what your video strategy, I would focus on like how can we really tell the story of this brand or this product and make it stand out from the competition.
Yeah, we have a label kind of internally that's like the short form tech flex, of like taking technology that we really want you to understand in essentially less than 60 seconds, and that being like a format that we come back to a lot, and a format that tends to do like really well. In our space, obviously, as like a video creation platform, we're able to show off a lot of features kind of directly. Like here's like a final output that you can actually make with this. But yeah, if you could do that for a spreadsheet or business analysis tool, surely you can do it for almost anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. I think like one last kind of question I wanted to float your way was like, I know at Intercom you were like especially opinionated about like subject matter expert first or subject matter expert influenced content. I maybe this is a 2-part question. I try not to layer questions for people, but this one might have to be a 2-parter. I'm curious, like, do you sort of see that like in the same importance today? And then maybe a follow on to that is like, do you think the preference that buyers have for video complicates that approach at all? Does it make it easier? Does it make it kind of the same? So I'm super curious about where you kind of stand on that today.
Yeah, I suppose the subject matter expert kind of thing came from the fact that, like, even back when like I started at Intercom, you could see a lot of brands that were trying to do SEO strategy. It was like their content team was like publishing like 3-4 times a week. It was like pretty heavily informed by SEO. But like the content was like a lot of it around then was what I call happy mail content. It wasn't very satisfying. You didn't, look good. And then you consumed it and you kind of went, oh, so hungry 15 minutes later. And so like subject matter, like it was kind of a differentiator for us in some ways at Intercom of like, okay, like if we're going to be talking about like, and we publish content like across the board for startups. So we would have content about product design. We would have content about marketing, whatever. Like, yeah.
Right.
But we would find the person in charge, like engineering stuff. We would find the person internally who like probably knows about that. Their byline would be on it. Now behind the scenes, there were some people who like were great writers, and it was great. We just talked to them, kind of almost give them a brief or like hear what their ideas were, and go, yeah, we'll have that one.
Yeah.
But others, you literally had to like maybe interview them and transcribe it and ghostwrite it for them. Other people, you'd actually just stand at a whiteboard with them for 30 minutes and like just kind of sketch ideas. But like it was just figuring out like how can we get that subject matter expertise out of them and into content. And like you would rarely, like the only time you saw content marketers bylines on the Intercom blog was generally we were talking about like some of the content team had done or launch or like sharing some of our experience.
Yeah.
As I used to say, no one really cares what marketers think. And I think with video you just got to figure out like I think it's similar. I think I think it depends on the type of video. I mean, obviously not everyone's going to be comfortable getting in front of a camera, and you can't turn everyone in the company into a personality, but there are also people who will. And like, it's just trying to figure out, even if it's not, just how do you get that subject matter expertise, though, that depth into the content, I think, is really the key thing. And again, it's just trying to think about like what are the different, like how can we, if we've someone else fronting the video, how do we just get that knowledge in there and like that credibility in there?
Yeah.
I think that's the real thing. That's key.
Definitely. Yeah. So it sounds like, at least like some of our experience too, is like definitely develop your stars, the people who sort of, they're easy to work with because they either bring ideas or if they're appearing on camera, they bring a great on-screen presence. And like, as the marketing team, as the content team, like everything else should be turnkey. Like they should show up and have the easiest time of actually delivering what you want. And I think I sort of like, have to give a shout out to our CEO, Julia. We work with her for a lot of like video work. And I will say for folks who are at least somewhat curious, we sort of script out some talking points, but then she adds a ton of feedback in terms of like, here's what my actual opinion, here's a more interesting question. And then we try to make it easy for her to just show up and turn the camera on and we just go. So that's something that's worked for us with minimum scar tissue in the past. Yeah.
That's invaluable if you have a CEO or a co-founder or someone like very senior in the company who doesn't not just sees the value of content and like wants to invest in content, but will actually put themselves into the content. Like famously, Des Traynor at Intercom, he wrote like 93 of the first 100 blog posts at Intercom before I came along. So,
oh wow,
it's one thing to say we value content, we want to invest in content, but it's another thing to actually put your time into creating the content. But if you can get someone, as I say, a senior, because I presume that it makes it much easier when you go to other people in the company and say, hey, we want to work with you about content. They're like, well, Julia's done it. Of course I'm going to do it,
Yeah. Like, should we take the time? Well, it's like, here's some folks from the C level that already have, so maybe you should.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, John, it was awesome to catch up with you today. It was, I think, really some interesting things to unpack from not only the report, but your experience over, again, I think like really like high growth standout teams doing really excellent creative work. I do encourage everybody though to go check out the full report to get some of the stuff that we either passed over or just some of the extra details and nuance. But yeah, John, I appreciate the time. It was awesome talking to you, and thanks again for coming out to the show.
Thanks for having me, Greg. Great to be here.